All right, here we are again, 1st and 2nd Chronicles for beginners, subtitled Things Left Over. This is lesson number 2 in that series, and the title of this lesson is David's Rise and Reign, King David's Rise and Reign, 1 Chronicles chapter 10 to chapter 29. Hopefully you've read that material, because that's what we'll be talking about today. So in our last lesson, we looked at the genealogies of 1 Chronicles, chapters 1 to 9. And these laid the foundation for understanding God's enduring covenant and faithfulness. We said that by tracing the lineage from Adam to the post-exilic community, these chapters emphasize continuity. They highlighted the prominence of key tribes like the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Levi, tribe of Benjamin, and they demonstrated God's sovereign hand in preserving His people throughout the centuries, even through their terrible exile period. This context underscores the importance of heritage, identity, and God's promises, and they set the stage for the chroniclers. Remember we said the one who wrote the Chronicles, sometimes referred to as the chronicler. So for the chroniclers, focus on David's reign in the chapters that follow. So here's a list of events from 1 Chronicles chapters 10 to 29 concerning David that also appear in the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel or 1st and 2nd Kings. This is one of the reasons that these books seem very familiar as one reads through them. You read them, you say, well, I've read this before, I've read this story before, and you're correct. Chronicles includes the stories, but as we have noted last week, perhaps has a different take or a different viewpoint. So I just want to review the similar stories that appear in previous books. We begin with the death of Saul and David's rise to power. 1 Chronicles chapter 10, 1 to 14, and this is also written about in 2 Samuel chapter 1. So both of these accounts describe the tragic death of King Saul and his sons on Mount Gilboa. Chronicles, however, omits David's lament over Saul, found in 2 Samuel 1, and instead it focuses on the theological explanation for Saul's demise, and that was, of course, his unfaithfulness to God. This prepares the narrative for David's rise and framing it as a divinely ordained event. Now, Chronicles presents Saul's failure as a kind of a cautionary tale about the consequences of disobedience and unfaithfulness to God. The chronicler's omission of David's lament shifts the focus entirely to God's plan for Israel and the transition to David as the chosen king. Saul is not mentioned. Another event is David's anointing. This appears in 1 Chronicles 11 and also in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 to 5. Chronicles parallels Samuel's account of David's anointing at Hebron, where Israel recognizes David's divine appointment and makes a covenant with him. Chronicles emphasizes the unity of the tribes under David and God's role in selecting him as king. Remember I said again last time that in Chronicles you have a more idealized version of King David's reign. The chronicler emphasizes the covenant relationship between David and Israel, symbolizing the unity that God desires for His people. This reinforces the theme of David's legitimacy as a ruler chosen by God, which serves as a model of ideal leadership. A third event, the capture of Jerusalem, 1 Chronicles 11, 4 to 9, also in Samuel, 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 6 to 10. Both of these texts recount David's conquest of Jerusalem from the Jebusites, which becomes the political and spiritual capital of Israel. Chronicles highlights David's growing power as evidence of God's favor. Less focus on the military, more focus on the idea that God is the one elevating David to his position. The capture of Jerusalem is a turning point in David's reign, symbolizing God's provision and favor. Chronicles focuses on this event and ties David's success to God's presence and the city's future as the center for worship, pointing to eventually the building of the temple in that city. Another event, David's mighty men, 1 Chronicles chapter 11, 10 to 47, 2 Samuel chapter 23, 8 to 39. Chronicles and Samuel list David's mighty warriors, celebrating their loyalty and military achievements. Chronicles, however, provides an expanded roster of individuals with additional details about their exploits, emphasizing their vital role in David's success. The chronicler uses this list to highlight the importance of teamwork and loyalty in achieving God's purposes. By honoring these warriors, Chronicles underscores the collective effort required for Israel's victories. David couldn't do it alone, in other words. And God, of course, as the ultimate source of success. The fifth event, the ark is brought to Jerusalem. 1 Chronicles chapter 13, 15, 16, and 2 Samuel chapter 6. Both accounts deal with David's efforts to bring the ark to Jerusalem. Chronicles, however, adds unique details, including the role of the Levites in carrying the ark and David's careful organization of worship. The Psalm of Thanksgiving in 1 Chronicles chapter 16 is also unique to the book of Chronicles. And so Chronicles' focus on the Levites and the worship system reflects the chronicler's emphasis on proper worship and reverence for God's presence in the temple among the people. The Psalm of Thanksgiving, 1 Chronicles 16, 8 to 36, serves as a model for responding to God's blessings with gratitude and with praise. Event number 6, God's covenant with David. Again, 1 Chronicles 17, 1 to 15, 2 Samuel chapter 7. Both texts recount God's covenant with David, promising him an eternal dynasty and the establishment of his throne. Chronicles emphasizes God's sovereignty and the centrality of the temple in this covenant. And so the covenant is a cornerstone of Israel's theology, pointing to God's faithfulness and the hope of a Messiah from the Davidic line. Chronicles highlights the temple's role in this promise, reflecting the post-exilic focus on worship and God's presence among his people. Event number 7, David's victories over his enemies. 1 Chronicles 18 to 20 and 2 Samuel chapter 8 and 10. Chronicles and Samuel, again, both document David's military successes against the Philistines, the Moabites, the Ammonites, and other enemies. These victories are portrayed as evidence of God's favor and David's role as his chosen leader. Chronicles presents David's victories as part of God's plan to establish peace and security for Israel, paving the way again for the building of the temple and the worship that will take place there. This portrayal highlights the connection between God's blessings and faithful leadership. David was successful in overcoming his enemies, not only because he had a powerful military, he had the mighty men and all that. His victory relied on his faithfulness in God. The eighth similar event, the census and its consequences. 1 Chronicles 21, verses 1 to 30, and 2 Samuel chapter 24. Chronicles and Samuel both recount David's census and the subsequent plague that followed. Chronicle adds details about Satan inciting David in 1 Chronicles 21:1, and David's purchase of the threshing floor of Ornan, later designated as the temple site. Chronicles uses this episode to emphasize God's mercy and the significance of the temple site itself. By including Satan's role, the chronicler underscores the spiritual dimension of David's sin and God's redemptive purposes in saving the people from the the plague that ensued. And so the Chronicles version of events focuses on theological themes such as covenant faithfulness, the centrality of worship, and God's sovereignty. While paralleling Samuel and Kings, Chronicle often adds details or shifts the focus to highlight lessons that are relevant to the post-exilic community. Remember, Chronicles was written by and for the people who had come back from the exile in Babylon. So in recounting these stories, these events, as I say, the facts were the same, the story was the same, the event was the same, but the focus and the meaning was shifted in the book of Chronicles, as I mentioned before, to a more theological perspective for the people of that period. All right, so there we have 8 major events. When you're reading in Samuel or Kings, you find them also in Chronicles. So we're not going to drill down into each of these events. If you want to know about these, then go back and take a look at 1st and 2nd Samuel or 1st and 2nd Kings, and you'll get more information about that. Now we move on to events and details that are found only in 1st Chronicles. So the first of these is the following: David's extensive preparations for the temple, 1st Chronicles 22:2 to 29:20, so 7 chapters. So Chronicles records David's meticulous preparation for building the temple, a task that he himself was forbidden to complete because he was a man of war, 1st Chronicles 22:8. Despite this, David collected vast amounts of materials, including gold and silver and bronze, iron and timber. He also organized workers such as stonemasons and craftsmen. David personally contributed generously to the project himself, 1 Chronicles chapter 29, 3-5, inspiring the people to give willingly as well. Again, 1 Chronicles 29, this time verses 6-9. So this narrative emphasizes David's deep devotion to God and his understanding of his role as a preparer and not a builder. His actions demonstrate that spiritual leadership includes not only vision, but also preparation for future generations. The chronicler's focus on David's generosity underscores the importance of giving to God's work with a willing heart, and we see this. He was very disappointed. He had looked forward to building the temple, a place of worship for God, and he was denied that task that he wanted to do. And so he took another task that was necessary for it. He didn't go off and pout. He didn't get mad and walk away. He found another way to serve, and I think there's a lesson there for us today. Many times we're thwarted perhaps in serving in a particular way that we'd like to, and instead we're put to work in another area where work is needed, so to speak, and it's not exactly what we had in mind. But when we do it with a good heart, we have success. And we simply have to look at David's experience. Solomon could not have built the temple without the preparations that David had undertaken. Another event only in Chronicles is David's charge to Solomon, 1 Chronicles 22:6-13 and 28:9 and 10. And so David gives Solomon a direct charge, urging him to obey God and to build the temple as ordained, 1 Chronicles 22:11-13. In chapter 28, David's address is more personal and spiritual, stressing that Solomon must serve God with a whole heart and a willing mind, as God examines every heart, 1 Chronicles 28:9. So this charge highlights David's fatherly and kingly role. By emphasizing obedience to God's law and the importance of Solomon's spiritual integrity, David underscores the relationship between faithfulness to God and successful leadership, something that he himself had experienced not only success at, but also failure. There were times he disobeyed and he was severely punished, and so he's passing on this leadership or this understanding to his son. The chronicler's inclusion of these exhortations reveals his theological emphasis on covenant faithfulness as the key to Israel's prosperity. In other words, even the kings had to obey. Especially the kings had to obey. When the kings disobeyed, usually what happened is that they would lead the people into disobedience. So it's very important to obey the Lord. And we see in these verses David emphasizing this idea to his son Solomon. Another event exclusive to Chronicles, organizing the Levitical divisions in 1 Chronicles chapters 23 to 26. Here David reorganizes the Levites, assigning them specific duties in anticipation of temple worship. This includes the division of the Levites into 24 groups for service, the appointment of priests and musicians in 1 Chronicles 25, the appointment of gatekeepers in 1 Chronicles 26, and treasurers in 1 Chronicles 26, a little further on, verses 20 to 36. So David was leaving nothing to chance in his organization of temple worship. The chronicler's detailed account of Levitical organization reflects the importance of worship and order in the community's life. David's focus on worship systems demonstrates his recognition that the temple would not be just a building, but a center of Israel's spiritual life. This administrative foresight also highlights David's legacy as a planner for long-term spiritual and communal stability. And it's the same today. It hasn't changed. Leaders today have to prepare and plan for the leaders of tomorrow. The leaders of tomorrow are not just going to pop up. They have to be found, they have to be recruited, they have to be trained, they have to be encouraged, they have to be taught. And who does that? Well, the leaders of today. The leaders of today find and teach the leaders of tomorrow. That's how congregations in the modern age, that's how they last 20, 30, 50, 100 years or more, because one generation of leaders prepares for the next generation of leaders and work of the church. Number 4, David's military and administrative organization, the political side of his reign. 1 Chronicles 27, David establishes a well-structured military system, dividing the army into 12 divisions, each serving 1 month per year. So it was a volunteer army, but they weren't always on standby. They had, each had a month to serve. He also appoints leaders over Israel's tribes and stewards to manage the royal estates and properties and, of course, the livestock. This account demonstrates David's administrative skill and foresight in organizing Israel's defense and its economy. The chronicler's inclusion of this material reflects the belief that good governance, along with spiritual faithfulness, is essential for national success. By linking administration with worship, David is shown as a leader who integrated all aspects of life under God's authority. Number 5, David's final prayer and offering in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verses 10 to 20. So here David leads the people in a prayer of praise and thanksgiving during the final preparations for the temple. He acknowledges God as the source of all wealth and power, humbling himself and expressing gratitude for the opportunity to contribute to God's work. And the people join in the offering and the worship and the expressing of unity and joy. It's a high point. This event here is a high point in David's reign, a high point in the Jews' history. And the moment showcases David's humility and dependence on God, marking a climactic point in his leadership. He was never better, so to speak. He was never better than at this moment. The chronicler emphasizes the communal aspect of worship and giving, showing that both the leader and the people must acknowledge God as the ultimate provider. The theological message is clear. Everything belongs to God, and all human achievements are accomplished through His grace. By the grace of God, we will do this. By the grace of God, we will do that. And this event here underscored this idea. And then the sixth event that I want to talk about is the details on the census and its consequences in 1 Chronicles chapter 21. The census episode in Chronicles, while similar to 2 Samuel 24, includes unique details. For example, David purchases the threshing floor of Ornan for 600 shekels of gold in 1 Chronicles 21-25, and he designates it as the site for the future temple. The narrative emphasizes David's repentance and God's mercy in sparing Jerusalem through the angel's intervention. If we remember, David calls for a census. Not a good idea. He's trying to count the people either for taxes or to determine his strength. And this episode highlighted, if you wish, a sense of pride in David, and God punished him for that, punished the people for that. And after they were saved, David wants to offer sacrifice, and he buys the threshing floor of Ornan, who provides his threshing floor and animals and so on and so forth to make a sacrifice. And it's at that moment that David says that David decides this will be the place where the temple will be built on this particular site. So the site of a great, you remember I said before, that was the high point, David's high point. This is the low point. The king, because of his foolishness and pride, has led the people into suffering and discipline from God, a low point. And when it's over, he chooses this place to be the temple. So the site of the moment when he offers God a sacrifice, thanking him for stopping the plague, thanking him for the forgiveness for his sin, will eventually become the place where all the sacrifices will be made on behalf of all the people for the sins that are made, and so on and so forth. Very, very interesting detail here. The chronicler account shifts focus from David's sin to the redemptive outcome, highlighting the site's significance, as I said, as the location of the temple. And so this theological framing shows that even in failure, God can bring about his purposes. David's repentance and action to secure the temple site demonstrate his role as a man after God's own heart, despite his flaws. That's the point. He was a man after God's own heart, despite his great flaws. It should be a very encouraging thing for all of us. And so the chronicler presents David not only as a warrior and a king, but also as a spiritual leader who laid the foundation for Israel's future worship life. These accounts emphasize covenant faithfulness, preparation for the future, and the centrality of worship, providing theological lessons for post-exilic Israel and, of course, for readers like us today. So we'll stop there in going over some of the events and perhaps draw a couple of lessons that we can apply today. Lesson number one, God has always been in control. I mean, if you see anything as you read, not just through Chronicles, but if you read Kings and Samuel and Kings and Chronicles, you see that God has always been in control. God's sovereignty and human responsibility, the interplay between these two things in 1 Chronicles chapter 17, verses 1 to 15. The covenant with David demonstrates God's sovereign control over history and his faithfulness to his promises. God establishes David's throne, promising an eternal dynasty, and this was fulfilled in Jesus Christ many centuries later. In modern times, this reminds believers that God is in control of history, even amid uncertainty. The wars and the things that are going on today, do we think really that God is not interested in those? Do you think that God has no input, that God has no control, that God is not moving the events of history still today, not just in the Old Testament? And so even when we're uncertain, we have to remember that God has always and continues to be in control. His promises, particularly the ultimate victory and reign of Christ, provide all of us believers hope and assurance. Christians are called to trust God's sovereignty while faithfully fulfilling their responsibilities in His redemptive plan. Another lesson that we can draw. Worship has always been central. In other words, the centrality of worship in the life of God's people. This is a lesson here. The lesson for the church is that worship has always been an element, an important element in the relationship between God and His people, in the Old Testament and the New Testament as well. David's preparation for bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem emphasizes the importance of proper worship and reverence for God's presence. The detailed organization of Levites and musicians and the Psalm of Thanksgiving in II Chronicles chapter 16 highlights worship as central to Israel's identity. Who were they? Who were these people? They were the people that worshiped Yahweh. They were the people who worshiped God. That's what separated them. That's what made them different than the other tribes, the other clans, the other peoples. They were God's people. And the sign of their relationship with God was the temple and the worship that took place at the temple. The church today is called to prioritize worship as a core aspect of its life and its mission. Worship must be God-centered and joyful and reverent, involving all believers in both celebration and service. This includes honoring God's holiness, fostering unity in worship, and making room for heartfelt praise and thanksgiving. It's not just a bonus thing that we do. Worship is at the heart of who we are as Christians. What is the difference between us and people in the world that don't identify as Christians? The difference is we worship the living God. We're different in that way. Not only because we meet on a particular day to offer public worship, but that we are people that worship God as a daily thing. It's not just part of our life, it's the center of our lives. And so we can at least see that idea being developed during this post-exilic time as the people go back. And what's the first priority? First priority is rebuild the temple, right? I mean, they just get the floor done and the base done, and the first thing they do is build an altar. There are not even any walls up yet. Why? Because worship was central to their existence as Jews, as the people of God. So worship has always been central and continues to be central in our lives as believers today. A third lesson. Serving God is always a priority for believers. Generosity and humility in serving God is what we see in I Chronicles 29. David's prayer and personal contribution to the temple project highlight his acknowledgement that all wealth and all resources come from God. His humility in giving inspires others to give joyfully and sacrificially. You can't give joyfully if you don't give sacrificially. These two things go together. If it costs you nothing, it brings you no joy. If it costs you nothing, it has no impact on your spiritual life. And I'm not just saying what we put in the plate. I mean, we have to give time to something that we'd rather do something else. If it hurts, then the reward is great. So Christians are called to be generous stewards of their time, their talents, and their treasures as well. Recognizing that everything belongs to God, individuals should give willingly to support God's work, whether through the local church or missions or acts of service. This attitude fosters gratitude and combats materialism, and it brings glory to God. Yes, many could be richer if they saved more of their money, if they gave less to the Lord and less to good works and so on and so forth. But the joy of the Lord comes as we serve the Lord, and the greater joy comes as our service grows deeper and deeper, and the cost grows for us in order to offer to Him something which is meaningful to us, whether it's time or money, things, whatever. If it's meaningful to us and if it costs us something, then it is pleasing to the Lord, and it brings joy to our hearts. Okay, well, there's a couple of applications for that section of Chronicles. One more lesson to go, and so I ask you again, read 1 Chronicles 10 to 29, now that you have a little bit of information, a little background information. Hopefully these passages will come to life more vividly for you. And then go ahead and read all of 2 Chronicles, chapters 1 to 36, and if the Lord is willing, we will cover that in our next lesson. Thank you for your attention. I pray that God bless you, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.